Hello everyone, this is Sarah Said, and in this presentation I will be talking about Corpora in human translation from Corpus Linguistics and International Handbook. So I will start with a brief introduction on corpus-based translation studies, focusing on their importance, techniques, and use. My second point will be on corpus design and availability, discussing the different types of corpus design and some examples. Then my third point will be on corpus processing, which will focus on the possible methods and procedures in corpus processing. And the final point will be on application in translation and translatology, which will focus on three main domains: education and training of translators, translation practice, and translation research. Human translation is one of the fields in which the use of Corpora has had a growing impact in the last couple of decades. Corpus-based translation studies is thus beginning to form a major paradigm both within the discipline of translation studies and across its boundaries. So the importance of using Corpora in translation studies is that it allowed to shift from observation of text samples to the investigation of larger sets of text. This opportunity allowed to investigate larger amounts of data and conduct more empirical research on translations. This also allowed the use of a variety of techniques, existing corpus linguistic techniques like keyword in context concordances or automatic frequency counts of words, and also new methodological and technical sophisticated techniques like corpus annotation, corpus maintenance, and corpus query. These have only been developed for monolingual corpora and have been recently employed in corpus-based translation studies. Whatever the focus of a translation research is, corpus-based work potentially offers the opportunity to make analysis procedures transparent and analysis results replicable. So the principal challenges of corpus-based translation studies are methodological ones, and the primary issue is to decide which of its research questions lend themselves to corpus linguistics. Here, the stronger the interest in linguistic microanalysis as a way of answering the research questions posed, the more corpus-based procedures of analysis lend themselves to application in translation research. Thus, old questions can be answered in novel ways, like text translation alignment, which is the technical basis of parallel concordance programs and is still an issue in computational linguistics and translation equivalence, and also detecting universal laws of translation through comparing different translations. And in such way, corpus-based translation studies are observed as universals of translation. Now that we have the technology to analyze larger sets of data, new questions can be posed as well. These include investigating language change through translation, observing translation as functional or registral variation, and investigating issues of cognitive processing. Corpus-based work can thus shed light on traditional research topics and inspire new aspects to be investigated. Now we're moving to the next section, corpus design and availability of Corpora. Corpus-based research on translations requires particular types of corpus design. Two types of corpus design are most commonly used in corpus-based translation studies, which are the parallel corpus and the monolingual comparable corpus. Parallel corpora, as illustrated in the diagram, consists of source language texts and translations of those texts into a target language. Monolingually comparable corpora are collections of translations from one or more source languages into one target language and original text in the target languages. There is a third type of corpus design, which is a combination of parallel and comparable corpora. Such combination will automatically contain a third subcorpus, which is the multilingual comparable corpus. This multilingual corpus consists of source language original texts, target language translations, and target language original texts. Parallel corpora are commonly employed in bilingual lexicography and more recently also in machine translation. They are used to provide information on language pair-specific translation behavior. Also to observe equivalence relations between lexical items or grammatical structures in the source and target languages or in the learner's corpus, and to investigate translation problems and translation mistakes. Recent parallel corpus initiatives are moving towards more than one language pair, like the Oslo Multilingual Corpus. Also, there are a few tree-banking efforts that aim at annotating parallel corpora in terms of syntactic structure. Parallel corpora are the most widespread. Among the best-known parallel corpus resources are the French-English-Canadian Handbook, parts of which are available in aligned form. Also, the English-Norwegian parallel corpus and the English-Swedish parallel corpus. Comparable corpora have the potential to reveal most about features specific to translated text. Those features occur exclusively or with unusual low or high frequency in translated text as opposed to other types of text production, and cannot be traced back to the influence of any one particular source text or language. The main application of comparable corpora is the investigation of the specific and possibly universal properties of translations. The fact that translations exhibit linguistic properties that distinguish them from texts that are not translations is sometimes also referred to as translationese. Among the features researchers have cited comparing translations and texts originally produced in the target language are explication, simplification, and normalization. Monolingual comparable corpora are less frequent than parallel corpora. Among the best known corpora of the kind are the corpus of translated Finnish and the translational English corpus. Comparable corpora can also be useful in translation training and translation practice. This combination of parallel and comparable corpora forming multilingually comparable corpus can be used for cross-linguistic comparison of translated texts, original texts, and original and translated text. Also, it could be used for monolingual comparison of original and translated texts. Multilingually comparable material is generally available, an example of which is the European Corpus Initiative. Corpus processing. Most corpus-based research is carried out on the basis of raw text. Only the encoding of meta-information is a usual practice. Recently, however, the use of annotated corpora is becoming more common because this is the only way of empirically investigating grammatical and semantic as well as discourse or register features. Investigating a corpus across languages requires several processing steps. Possible methods and procedures are described as follows. The first process is alignment. The second one is linguistic annotation. The third one is representation and markup. And the fourth one is querying. As for alignment, for the analysis of a parallel corpus, the units of translation, which are source language text units and their translational equivalents, need to be aligned. There are various alignment programs freely available. Additionally, aligners are often incorporated in translation memories, which are databases with source language segments and their aligned target language equivalents, such as the Translator's Workbench by Trados. The most commonly implemented technique is sentence-by-sentence alignment. The aligned sentences are stored either in one file where the source language sentence and its translation are represented in a tab-separated vector format or in two separate files, linking the sentences through identical line numbers, which are later exported to translation workbenches or translation memories, and to standard applications like Microsoft Excel and Microsoft Access. Other techniques apply to paragraph or words, which are prerequisite for statistical machine translation. The second process is linguistic annotation. For the analysis of grammatical and semantic features, as well as discourse features, texts have to be linguistically annotated with the relevant information. There are a number of automatic annotation techniques. The most reliable ones are morphological analyzers and part-of-speech taggers. Morphological analyzers follow either a rule-based or a statistical approach. A language-specific training is required on the basis of which probabilities concerning the occurrence of different tags can be calculated, while part-of-speech tagging rules have to be modified according to the language which is to be analyzed. Other types of annotations, such as syntactic and semantic tagging, while potentially useful, are not common for these reasons. First, the types of research questions most commonly posed in corpus-based translation studies are often sufficient to use part-of-speech tag text or even raw text. Second, syntactic and even more so semantic annotation always involve manual effort. Fully automatic procedures are not available or not sufficiently reliable, so that the annotations have to be either checked by humans or carried out manually. Another embedding factor in corpus-based analysis of translation is multilinguality. Many of the available tools are not entirely language independent. When applied to a new language, they have to be adapted to that language. For instance, in part-of-speech tagging, tag sets which are both suitable for the new language and comparable to the tag set of the first language have to be designed, and the tagger needs to be trained. The third process is representation and markup. Encoding corpora in translation studies commonly adheres to standards such as the one deployed by the Text Encoding Initiative TEI, employing Standard Generalized Markup Language SGML or Extensible Markup Language XML for representation. The text body is annotated for headings, sentences, and paragraphs. Each text is encoded in terms of a header that provides meta information on title, author, publication, register information, and so on. In case of a translation corpus, it is important to encode information on the translator and the translation process. As displayed in this picture, this is the header of the Translational English Corpus, or the TEC. The header displays information on the title of the book, the translator, the translation output, the translation process, the author of the original, and the source language text. Another example from the ELAN or ELAN Slovene English corpus. The corpus is divided into translation units, marked in the screenshot as TU. Each translation unit includes the original and the translated segment. Most of the alignment is sentence-based, so each translation unit covers one sentence and its translation. In addition, words marked as W and punctuation as C, elements are distinguished in the corpus. The last process is querying. Translation corpora are queried. Both the target language matches and their aligned source language segments are displayed in the concordance. Aligned equivalents are displayed in a keyword in context output. Examples of query tools which support working with multilingual text are the Parallel Concordancer Paraconc, the Translation Corpus Explorer, and the Corpus Query Processor. Marked meta information is important to filter the corpus and divide it into subcorpora to enable corpus queries according to register or independent variables such as publication date, nationality of the author, or sex of the translator. So in the displayed screenshot from the TEC, the subcorpora selection tool is shown. It allows the user to restrict the results of concordancing queries and the content of frequency tables to sections of files matching certain selection criteria. These criteria can be, for example, author, translator, translator gender, source language, translator nationality, etc. So, translations of full-time in-house translators who translate into their mother tongue can, for instance, be compared to translations of male part-time freelance translators who translate into a foreign language. Moving to our last section, application in translation and translatology. In translation studies, corpora have been used in the fields of terminology and lexicography, as well as for the development of translation aids such as translation memories or machine translation programs. Only recently, large electronically available corpora have come to be used in translation education and training, translation practice, and translation research. Only recently, large electronically available corpora have come to be used in translation education and training, translation practice, and translation research. So first, corpora in translation education and training. The basic idea of using corpora in translator education and training is that a parallel corpus consists of a more comprehensive and diverse variety of source language in terms and possible translation solution than a dictionary could ever display. Thus, it could be used for language or translation purposes. For language purposes in which parallel corpora are explored for terminology lookup, in a language-specific purposes context, in teaching the usage of collocations as well as register, and typology-specific patterns of the target language, and also to look up not only lexical items but also grammatical structures. As for translation purposes, parallel corpus can show translation students and language learners how to deal with translation problems and how to avoid typical mistakes. There are many approaches to using education and training corpora. One interesting approach is to provide students with insights into possible translation strategies through collecting several translations of one or the same source language text and then providing them with a feedback. Here, students are able to learn to which degree the linguistic structures of the source language text can be preserved in the target language, or how they have to be transferred according to the norms of the target language. Another method or approach is through using learner corpora. Several translations of one and the same source language text produced by students are collected in a corpus. Possible translation errors or peculiarities can be tagged and explored in such a way that the students can learn from the translation behavior of other learners and translators. So the second use of Corpora is in translation practice. And to be able to understand the use of Corpora in translation practice, we have to distinguish between the translation of highly repetitive texts, such as manuals or instructions, and the translation of creative writing, such as fiction or expository prose or scientific texts. As for highly repetitive texts, in the context of translating software manuals, for instance, it can be worthwhile to compile previously translated manuals, align them, and store them in a database which can then be used for reference. Such translation memories are usually equipped with alignment and terminology management tools, such as Translator's Workbench by Trados, and are thus useful both for terminology lookup and for the pre-translation of phrases and even of whole sentences. Linguistically annotated corpora can help to solve grammatical and semantic translation problems. There are two types of corpora that could be used with highly repetitive text. First, multilingually comparable corpus, which can be used for exploring register use as well as typological differences. This is extremely helpful for the translation of special purposes texts and the acquisition of highly specialized terminology, since term banks and glossaries can be built up easily. The second type of corpus is the parallel corpus. A parallel corpus can be employed as a multilingual lexical resource, being more comprehensive and diverse than dictionaries. The second type of text is the creative text. Multilingual and parallel corpora can support the translation process of a creative text. So the translation of literary text and the investigation of a comparable corpus can reveal the personal style of an author or a translator that may be incorporated in the translation process. The World Wide Web is an important reference resource for professional translators, which is freely available and easily accessible for many different languages. It could be used for lexical lookup. For example, by initiating a search engine like Google, one can easily look up the meaning of any word in context. The World Wide Web could also be used to search for multilingual websites, which are translated websites, from which parallel texts can easily be downloaded, aligned, and used as a parallel corpus or a translation memory. An easy way to explore linguistically the web is the online tool WebCorp, which displays the matches in the form of a concordance, a KWIC output. The last application of Corpora is in translation research. Sager in 1984 suggests to examine translations as a special kind of text production and to look into their special characteristics. Here, the value of a translation is still regarded as being dependent on that of its original text. In contrast, Baker in 1995 tries to exclude the influence of the source text on a translation and suggests analyzing the characteristics of the translations independently of the source language. In this context, Baker formulates a hypothesis on the universal features of translations that scholars use corpora to test these characteristics of the translated text. So scholars used the TEC and the BNC as comparable corpora. Some used them to test simplification and leveling out by analyzing average sentence length, lexical density, and type token ratio. Others used them to investigate explication and found evidence of explication in the TEC and the BNC. Other scholars found evidence of normalization in a tagged version of the TEC. So, through the use of comparable corpora, we can test whether these translation universals are in languages other than English using comparable corpora. While through using parallel corpora, we can use them to identify information structure and thematic structure, and to investigate them across languages. Finally, the use of parallel comparable corpora is to identify the influence of the source language text on the translations and on the target language. So that's all for chapter 55, Corpora in Human Translation. Thank you very much for your patience and attention.